Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Current News Extra Conversation, a program where we invite innovators, stakeholders, and influencers in the blockchain, crypto, and fintech ecosystem to come air their mind and the state of the ecosystem. So today we'll be talking about how blockchain and digital asset can be used commercially. So I have with me a great contributor to the ecosystem, Johnny Fry, who is the CEO of Team Blockchain Limited. Johnny, you're welcome to Current News Extra.
Thank you very much. Nice to be on your show.
It's our pleasure to have you. How is the UK today?
Yeah, UK's good. Typical February grey day. So hopefully it's a lot nicer and sunnier where you are.
Yeah, it's very sunny here. So it's sunny over here in Lagos State, Nigeria. So we'll be looking at how blockchain and digital assets can be used commercially. But before we dive into that particular topic, we'd like to get a brief about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. Well, most of my life, most of my career, I've actually been involved in managing people's money. So back in the late 1980s, I set up a business called Premier Asset Management, which basically has a range of mutual funds, managing pension funds and savings. And we then floated that business on the London Stock Exchange, and I was CEO of that company for over 20 years. And about 5 or 6 years ago, started coming across the technology of blockchain and digital assets. And of course, that meant at the time mainly sort of Bitcoin and Ethereum. And it wasn't a topic that I particularly wanted to pursue because at the time, Bitcoin had a lot of very bad press. It tended to be used by things like the Silk Road and all sorts of sort of scurrilous activities. But we've seen, if you like, in the last 5 years, instead of digital assets and cryptocurrencies being driven by people who are trying to get around regulations and by what people call as cyberpunks. They don't want to deal with banks. They don't want to deal with anything of the traditional sort of financial system. Now what we're seeing is the whole thing is sort of turned almost on its head, and we're seeing digital assets being driven by global corporations and by governments. And we've recently seen, obviously, the announcement from China that they want to launch their own digital currency. And according to the International Bank of Settlements, they're talking to many of the central banks, and they claim over 80% of the banks have currently got projects to look at how they introduce a digital dollar, a digital euro, a digital pound, a digital yen. And a lot of this has been sparked by the work that Facebook, with what was Libra, is now called Diem, have actually been doing. And I think governments have realized the importance of this technology and the assets and the currencies that they can create. So we've gone very much from sort of individuals and very skillful tech people to actually global companies like Alibaba, Microsoft, JP Morgan, big companies now looking, say, okay, can we harness this technology and can create digital assets to disintermediate and drive out inefficiencies in the current largely paper-based and analog systems that we have in the world.
Okay, Johnny, your focus has been on analyzing how, where, and why blockchain and digital assets can be used commercially. What are some of your findings? You are doing a research on that.
Yeah, so we actually write a weekly publication looking at how, where, and why blockchain technology and digital assets are being used. So actually in last week's publication, we listed a whole load of examples. So in China, Alibaba, it's actually using the technology and many global patents that it has in the sort of supply chain and logistics, but they're also using it in financial services and to fight against counterfeit food, because one of the things, and probably the most important thing that blockchain can actually offer, is greater transparency. And therefore, greater transparency leads to greater trust. And when it comes to food, people want to make sure they know where their food has been produced and who's it been produced by. Another example is the accountancy and consulting firm Ernst & Young. They've been very involved with something called Baseline Protocol. And what that's trying to do is to record business data. And it's sharing that information between different sort of stakeholders. So an example of that is Coke One in North America, and SAP. And Coke One North America is a bottling business for Coca-Cola. and they're using the technology in that way. Another example would be Maersk, the huge shipping and container business, and they've teamed up and created TradeLens, and they're actually looking to digitize the movement of not just the ships themselves, but the actual containers and the goods within those ships, using a combination of blockchain and Internet of Things and artificial intelligence. So there's many different examples, and what we say, well, look in Korea. Then Korea is actually using blockchain for banking and healthcare, and looking to actually potentially replace driving licenses in the paper format and have it in a digital format. And what we recommend to customers is, why don't you actually just put in blockchain plus pharmaceutical, or blockchain plus fashion, or blockchain plus insurance, and you'll find many different examples of how it's actually being used in a sector, in an area that is very important and very relevant to your own situation. So even with yourself, Oracle and Microsoft have actually selling a lot of cloud services and using blockchain to help for Nigeria Customs and Starbucks and Singapore Airlines, and GE Aviation. So lots and lots of examples how the technology is now being used, not just spoken about.
What are some of the contributions of Team Blockchain Limited in the ecosystem?
Well, probably the main thing that we provide, we work with a number of large accountants, lawyers, and corporate brokers, working with their clients to understand how, where, and why you use the technology. So a lot of 2017 and 2018, we actually spent being very active in encouraging people not to do an initial coin offering. A lot of people try to jump on the bandwagon, and basically they were breaking the law. And they were basically trying to raise money as a security. And we've now seen the SEC pursuing a number of these companies quite aggressively. So we've seen some of the biggest ICOs actually being closed down and having to change their business plan. Like Telegram, for example, they raised 1.3 billion. We saw the announcement with SEC had come to a financial arrangement and fined EOS 24 million. And right now we have the challenge that Ripple have, where the SEC is saying that they've issued 1.3 billion of securities. And we have a hearing in 2 weeks' time, I think the 15th of February, where the SEC are taking Ripple to court to say you've broken the law. So a lot of people have tried to jump on this bandwagon and say, well, cryptocurrencies or ICOs, they're a quick way to raise money. And that's just not the case. You are raising money from the public, and you need to treat the people that give you that money with a huge amount of respect, and very often it needs to be regulated. So we work closely with a number of companies that are regulated, and that's why we create this Digital Bytes, because it's trying to analyze, give real examples of how, where, and why the technology is appropriate and being used, and working with the lawyers and the accountants, customers and clients, to point out examples of when and how do you set up a stable coin, how the technology is being used with a land registry, how the technology can be used in the asset management industry, or how the technology can be used in the retail sector. So what we're doing is working with a number of different clients and looking at how do you actually drive out the inefficiencies and make your systems and procedures much more compliant and much less risky, because we find that businesses are looking to focus on how do they reduce the inherent risk within their business. And we think that's where we're going to see the technology being used more and more and more to improve the systems. And then from that, you'll then have the data in a much more structured format. And once it's structured, it can then be read not only by the human eye, but also by machines. And that's where we'll be able to see a layer of artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, and that will enable all sorts of efficiencies and new products and services then to be actually developed. So we're still at that building phase, but we are seeing some real live applications of the technology and the digital assets.
Interesting to know that. Let's look at this. You've been able to mention some things about cryptocurrency and blockchain. How do you see the future of blockchain and digital assets?
Sorry, how do I see them developing?
The future of blockchain and digital assets.
Okay, so let's say having managed money for many years, one of the key questions that people ask when they're looking to raise money is, obviously, how are you going to make a profit in terms of your business operations? But they're also asking, how do you run your business? What is your environmental, social, and corporate governance standards, ESG? And we're seeing more and more investors attaching much, much greater emphasis on this. And the biggest fund manager in the world is BlackRock. And it's one of their key requirements. How ethical is what you're doing? And so we see a really good example of this is the household consumer goods company called SC Johnson. So they make air fresheners and boot polish and cleaners. And they've teamed up with a company called Plastic Bank. And what they actually do is that they actually give children tokens and people tokens to actually pick up litter. So when they've picked up the plastic off of the beach, off of the streets, they can then take it to a center, and they're actually then given a financial reward, a token, and it's put on their mobile phone, and then they can swap those tokens for for goods and services. So there's a really good example of how blockchain technology is able to track and trace what's going on. It creates a token, a reward scheme, whereby they can then actually encourage people through nudge economics to change their behavior. So what we're likely to see as we move from a very centralized economy, and we're seeing more and more opportunities to effectively create new assets. So you'll be able to sell information, i.e. data. So instead of that information being held by a Google or a Facebook, you will own the data, whether it's you personally or whether it's you driving your car or whether it's the building that you work in, and you'll be able to monetize that data. So we're going to go from a situation whereby data was held by one or two big corporates to the data is actually be able to be sold by individuals and empower them to a much, much greater extent. And a lot of the current systems and processes, like there's 1.7 billion people in the world that are unbanked. I have no banking account, but many of those actually do have a mobile phone. So you'll be able to encourage people to change their behavior. You'll be able to grant them small credits and loans and things like that we're seeing in the DeFi sector, and embrace a completely new and much bigger market than has been possible before, because we're actually in an online digital environment as opposed to relying on bits of paper and data which can get hacked into and very laborious paper-based systems.
Interesting. It has really been an amazing time out with you, Johnny Fry, CEO, Team Blockchain Limited. Before we draw the curtain on today's episode of Coin News Extra Interview Session, Johnny, I would like to get your closing remark.
My closing remark. Well, I think the biggest challenge that we face at the moment is education. And what we mustn't do is get too bogged down in the technology and worrying about halving and sharding and hot wallets and cold wallets and is it proof of works or proof of stake, public and permission. Don't worry about the words, but you need to actually start learning and looking in your business sector how and where and why companies are using the technology and using digital assets. And that's what we do in Digital Bytes. So what we do is hyperlink. When we say IBM is working with this company and they reckon they can save 30%, who says 30%? Oh, it was in an article from the Financial Times or Reuters or CNBC or the Singapore Straits or, Le Monde in France. So the key is to actually start doing your research. Digital Bytes is a fantastic way to actually go about it, and they can get more information by emailing myself or contacting me on LinkedIn, but looking at how it's affecting your business, your industry, because you'll find there's lots and lots of actual things happening rather than people talking about it right now. And if you don't get involved with it, then you'll probably find your competitors will, and then you'll be on the back foot with your customers explaining about the technology rather than you explaining how you're going to transform and change your business.
Thank you very much, Johnny Fry, for joining us today on Coin News Extra Interview.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me again.
It's our pleasure.